All right, so today we're going to look at what's been going on over in the Russia-Ukraine conflict.
Okay.
You sent over two blog posts.
Yep.
One by Olga Lautman, her Unmasking Russia blog post from December 17th,
Right.
and then one by Tom Cooper
Mm.
from December 14th, his Sarcastosaurus blog post.
Okay.
And both are offering some really interesting and frankly different perspectives on recent events.
Yeah. It looks like we got a mystery on our hands in Moscow.
Yep.
And a look into the military tactics being used
Yeah, exactly.
in Ukraine.
And you know me, I love a good mystery.
Right.
Lautman's post details this scooter bomb explosion in Moscow
Okay.
that killed this high-ranking Russian military official, Lieutenant General Igor Kirillov.
Right.
Not just any general, though. He was the head of Russia's radiation,
Wow.
chemical, and biological defense troops.
Okay.
And get this, within an hour of the explosion,
Yeah.
Russia was already pointing the finger at Ukraine.
Really?
It just seems a little too convenient.
Yeah. That's
Don't you think?
certainly interesting
Yeah.
how quickly they were able to identify the perpetrators
Right.
and even the type of explosive used,
Yeah.
200 grams of TNT, according to their reports.
Wow.
What's fascinating here is not just the speed,
Right.
but what it might tell us about their intentions.
Yeah.
Are they trying to control the narrative
Yeah.
before any other information can come out?
Yeah, like, were they waiting for something?
Or are they
It-
genuinely
it-
that efficient? It raises a lot of questions.
And it almost feels like they had, like, a pre-written press release ready
Yeah.
to go.
That's a possibility.
Yeah.
And it speaks to Russia's sophisticated propaganda machine.
Right.
But to really understand the significance of this event,
Yeah.
we need to look closer at who Kirillov was
Okay. Yeah. Who was this guy?
and what he represented.
Fill me in.
So Kirillov was a prominent figure in spreading disinformation about the war.
Okay.
He was the voice behind those claims about Ukrainian biolabs
Oh, yeah.
and NATO's alleged involvement in chemical attacks.
So, wait.
Essentially, he was a key player in shaping the narrative.
The guy in charge of Russia's defense.
For Russia was pushing to justify their actions.
Against chemical and biological weapons.
Yeah.
Is the one accusing others of using them. Isn't that a bit ironic?
It is quite ironic,
Yeah.
especially considering Russia has been accused of using chemical weapons
Oh,
like
okay.
chloroquine in Ukraine.
Uh-huh.
Kirillov even headed the RKHBZ,
Okay.
the branch of the military dealing with those very weapons.
Wow. So this wasn't just some random general.
Yeah.
This was a
It's
guy who was
civic-
right in the middle of the information war.
And both Ukraine and the UK had previously sanctioned him for alleged war crimes.
Really?
His death, regardless of who's actually responsible,
Right.
is a significant event.
Yeah.
And the way Russia seized upon it to further their narrative
Right.
is a classic example of their propaganda playbook.
Right.
They've taken this tragic event and spun it into a way to demonize Ukraine.
It's almost like they're using this to rally support at home
Precisely.
and paint Ukraine as the aggressor,
Yeah.
even though, they're the ones who invaded.
It's a way to deflect blame
Right.
and maintain a sense of control over the narrative.
Okay, so we've got this possible assassination, this rapid-fire blame game,
Yeah,
and a whole lot of unanswered questions swirling around this Moscow explosion.
it is.
But let's switch gears now and shift our focus over to what's happening on the ground in Ukraine.
Okay.
This is where Cooper's analysis comes in.
Right.
And he's painting a pretty different picture.
Yes. Cooper's analysis is less about the political maneuvering
Right.
and more about the tactical realities of the war.
Okay.
He takes a deep dive into a recent wave of Russian drone and missile strikes.
Okay.
And he raises some very interesting points about how the conflict is evolving.
Okay, so what's so different about these recent strikes?
Well, for one, the sheer volume of firepower is quite remarkable.
Okay.
Russia launched a massive combined attack involving hundreds of weapons.
Hundreds.
Everything from attack drones to hypersonic missiles.
Hold on, hundreds. Like, what kind of numbers are we talking about here?
We're talking
And why so many all at once?
193 attack UAVs, 55 KH-101 cruise missiles, 24 Calibra cruise missiles,
Yeah.
7 Skander-K ground-launched cruise missiles.
Okay.
And that's not even the full list.
That's a lot.
This was a coordinated assault on a scale we haven't seen before.
What's the significance of this shift to using so many weapons at once?
That's a great question,
Yeah.
and it gets to the heart of Cooper's analysis.
Okay.
He suggests that this is partly a response to Ukraine's increasingly effective air defenses.
Okay.
by overwhelming those defenses with sheer numbers.
So it's like a brute force approach.
Russia's hoping to increase their chances of getting some of their weapons through.
Yeah, if you throw enough darts at the board, some of them are bound to hit the target.
That's one way to look at it.
Yeah.
But there's also a level of sophistication to this strategy
Okay.
that goes beyond just brute force. Cooper points to these suspicious works that were happening at a place called Kapustin Yar,
Okay, Kapustin Yar.
which is a Russian rocket launch and development site.
Is that some kind of top secret Russian
These activities possibly linked to the deployment of new missile systems
military base, or what are we talking about?
were a clever way to distract Ukraine and its allies.
Okay, so what were they doing there that was so suspicious?
We don't know for sure, but Cooper speculates
Right.
that they might have been testing or deploying
Okay.
a new type of intermediate-range ballistic missile called the Oreshnik.
Wow.
And by making it seem like they were preparing for a major attack on Kyiv,
Okay.
they were able to draw Ukrainian air defenses away from other areas.
So it was like a way to trick Ukraine into focusing on one area
Exactly.
while Russia prepared to strike elsewhere.
Right? That's pretty sneaky.
But why go through all that trouble?
Yeah.
Because it allowed them to exploit vulnerabilities in Ukraine's air defenses.
Yeah. While Ukraine was watching for a potential ballistic missile attack on Kyiv,
Correct.
Russia was able to launch this massive wave of drones and missiles
Right.
at other targets across the country.
Okay, so drones are becoming more and more common in warfare.
Right.
But what's so special about how Russia's using them in this case?
Well, they're not just using them for surveillance
Sure.
or targeted strikes as we've seen in the past.
Right.
In this attack, the drones played a crucial role in mapping Ukrainian air defenses.
Hold on. How can a drone map air defenses?
By forcing Ukrainian air defenses to activate their radars.
Okay.
Basically, the drones act as bait.
Gotcha.
They fly into an area, and if Ukrainian air defenses pick them up on their radar,
Right.
they have to activate their systems
Right.
to track and potentially target them.
Okay.
But by doing so, they reveal their own positions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I get it.
Exactly.
It's like those motion-activated lights that you see on houses.
Yeah.
When someone walks by, the light turns on and you know something's there.
Right.
So once the drones have lit up those Ukrainian air defense positions,
Yeah.
the cruise missiles can be programmed to avoid those areas,
Okay.
increasing their chances of hitting their targets.
Precisely.
So it's like a two-pronged attack.
Yeah.
The drones act as spotters, revealing the location of Ukraine's defenses,
Right.
and then the cruise missiles come in for the kill.
Precisely.
And it's a very effective tactic, as we've seen in these recent strikes.
Yeah.
But there's another layer to this strategy that we need to consider, and that's the choice of targets.
Right.
So if they're not just aiming for Kyiv anymore, what are they going after?
Well, the primary target in this recent waves of attacks was Ukraine's power grid,
Okay.
particularly in the Lviv Oblast.
Why the power grid?
That's a good question.
I mean, I get that it's important infrastructure,
Yeah.
but is that really the most strategically valuable target?
Cooper argues that it's a way to cripple Ukraine's infrastructure
Okay.
and weaken their ability to sustain the war effort. By disrupting power supplies, they can disrupt communications, transportation, and even basic services like heating and water.
So it's about more than just causing physical damage.
Exactly.
It's about disrupting daily life, undermining morale,
Right.
and making it harder for Ukraine to function as a country.
It's a way to exert pressure on the civilian population
Wow, that's a pretty ruthless strategy.
and potentially force Ukraine to the negotiating table.
But it sounds like it's working, at least to some extent.
It certainly seems to be having an impact.
Yeah.
And it highlights the changing nature of this conflict. It's no
Yeah.
longer just about capturing territory or winning battles.
Right.
It's about weakening the enemy's resolve,
Yeah.
both on the battlefield and among the civilian population.
All right, so we've got Russia using this combination of overwhelming force,
Yeah.
sophisticated tactics,
Hmm.
and targeted attacks on critical infrastructure.
Uh-huh.
It's a pretty grim picture, honestly.
Yeah.
But Cooper's analysis doesn't stop there. He also raises some concerns about Ukraine's response to these challenges.
And that's where things get really interesting.
Okay.
We've seen how Russia is adapting, but is Ukraine keeping up?
Yeah.
That's the question Cooper is asking.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What's Cooper's take on Ukraine's strategy or lack thereof?
Well, he argues that despite nearly 3 years of war,
Wow.
Ukraine still seems to be lacking a clear and cohesive strategic approach.
3 years into a war and they still don't have a clear plan.
That's the question Cooper is raising.
I mean, I know things are chaotic, but how is that even possible?
And he backs up his argument with some pretty specific examples.
Okay.
He points to the fact that Ukraine's air defenses are repeatedly being caught off guard
Okay.
by Russian adaptations like those chaff and flare dispensers we talked about.
Yeah.
He also criticizes Ukraine's intelligence gathering, saying that they haven't been able to provide
Okay.
crucial information about Russia's missile production and stockpiles.
So Cooper is saying that there is a disconnect between the different branches of the Ukrainian military
That's exactly what he's saying.
and intelligence services.
Yeah.
They're not sharing information effectively, and they're not coordinating their actions in a way
Right.
that maximizes their impact.
And he argues that this lack of coordination is leading to inefficiencies, wasted resources,
Okay. I'm starting to see where Cooper's coming from.
and ultimately a less effective response to the Russian threat.
But before we dive deeper into his critique of Ukraine's strategy,
Okay.
I think we need to take a closer look at what he's actually proposing.
Right.
What does he think Ukraine should be doing differently?
Those are excellent questions.
And what are the potential implications if they don't?
And they lead us to the heart of the matter. Let's unpack them in our next segment.
Okay, sound like a plan. We'll be right back after a quick break.
Sounds good. So you were wondering what Cooper thinks Ukraine should be doing differently to counter Russia's evolving tactics.
Yeah, what's his prescription for a more effective Ukrainian strategy?
Well, his main argument is that Ukraine needs to move beyond these reactive tactics and develop a more proactive long-term strategy
Yeah.
that anticipates Russia's moves
Right.
and exploits their weaknesses.
That makes sense in theory,
Right.
but it's easier said than done.
It is.
Russia seems to be constantly changing up their tactics, and they've got a lot more resources to throw at this conflict. So
Mhm.
how can Ukraine realistically keep up?
That's the challenge, and Cooper doesn't shy away from it.
Okay,
He acknowledges that Ukraine is facing an uphill battle,
right.
but he argues that they have some key advantages
Like what?
that they haven't fully leveraged yet.
What does Ukraine have going for it in this situation?
Well, one of their biggest advantages is their knowledge of the terrain
Okay.
and their ability to operate more effectively in urban environments.
Okay.
They've also shown remarkable resilience and adaptability,
Okay.
both on the battlefield and among the civilian population.
So they're fighting on home turf, and they've got the will to resist.
Right.
But what about the practical side of things? What specifically does Cooper think they need to change in terms of their military strategy?
He argues that they need to focus on disrupting Russia's logistics and supply lines,
Okay.
making it more difficult for them to sustain their operations.
So instead of just trying to defend every inch of territory, they should be looking for ways to disrupt the flow of supplies and reinforcements
Right.
to the Russian front line.
To the front lines, exactly.
But how can they do that effectively when Russia's got air superiority and a lot more firepower?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
Cooper suggests that they need to get more creative with their tactics,
Okay.
using a combination of conventional and unconventional methods.
So more guerrilla warfare,
Right.
more hit-and-run tactics,
Right.
a lot more focus on intelligence gathering.
And he also argues that they need to improve their intelligence gathering and analysis.
Right, but there's also the issue of coordination.
Exactly.
Cooper was pretty critical of the way different parts of the Ukrainian military and intelligence services are, or rather aren't working together.
He argues that there's a lack of communication and coordination between different branches
Right.
of the military and the intelligence services.
Right.
And he suggests that this lack of a unified command structure
Right.
is hindering their ability to develop and implement a coherent strategy.
So it's not just about having a good plan, it's about making sure everyone's on the same page
Absolutely.
and working together effectively.
Right.
But who's ultimately responsible for this lack of coordination?
Well-
Is Cooper pointing fingers at any specific individuals?
He does single out General Valery Zaluzhny,
Okay.
the commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian Armed Forces.
Okay.
Cooper suggests that Zaluzhny is struggling to effectively delegate authority
So he's saying that the top general is micromanaging the war effort.
and create a more decentralized command structure.
Isn't that a bit risky in a fast-moving conflict like this?
That's Cooper's contention.
Okay.
He argues that Zaluzhny's centralized approach is creating bottlenecks
Right.
and slowing down decision-making.
Okay.
He also suggests that there's a culture of secrecy and mistrust
Oh, wow.
within the Ukrainian military
Okay.
that's hindering the flow of information.
So not only do they need a better plan,
Right.
they need a better way of communicating and coordinating their actions.
Exactly.
It's a pretty tall order,
It is.
especially when you're in the middle of a war.
Right.
But is Cooper just being an armchair general here?
Well,
Or does he offer any specific suggestions for how to improve things?
he actually gets quite specific in his recommendations.
Okay.
He suggests that Ukraine needs to empower lower-level commanders to make more decisions
Okay.
on the ground,
Right.
giving them more flexibility to adapt to changing circumstances.
Yeah.
He also argues that they need to break down the barriers between different branches of the military and the intelligence services,
Okay.
creating a more integrated and collaborative approach to planning and decision-making.
Okay, so more decentralization,
These two,
more
huh?
trust, more information sharing.
More information sharing, more transparency.
But that's all internal stuff.
Right.
What about Ukraine's relationship with its Western allies?
Right.
How does that factor into Cooper's analysis?
That's a crucial point.
Okay.
Cooper argues that Ukraine needs to be more strategic in its requests for military aid
So not just asking for whatever they can get their hands on,
from its Western allies.
but actually thinking about what they need most to achieve their strategic objectives.
Exactly.
But hasn't Ukraine been pretty successful in getting weapons and other support from the West?
They have.
Why does Cooper think they need to change their approach?
Well, because he argues that Ukraine is at risk of becoming overly reliant
Okay.
on Western military aid,
Yeah.
and that this reliance could ultimately undermine their ability to fight the war
So they need to be careful about becoming too dependent on the West.
on their own terms.
But at the same time, they can't win this war without Western support.
Right.
It's a tricky balancing act.
It is a tricky balancing act.
But getting back to Cooper's main argument, isn't it a bit unfair to criticize Ukraine for not having a perfect strategy?
I think that's fair.
I mean, they're fighting for their survival against a much larger and more powerful enemy.
Yeah, and Cooper acknowledges that Ukraine has shown remarkable resilience and determination in the face of overwhelming odds.
Right.
But he argues that their bravery and fighting spirit won't be enough to win the war
Right.
in the long run.
So it's not about criticizing their courage. It's about pointing out areas where they can improve their chances of success.
Exactly.
But what are the real-world consequences if they don't address these issues?
Right.
What's the worst-case scenario?
Well, Cooper warns that if Ukraine continues to rely on these reactive tactics
Okay.
and fails to develop a more cohesive strategy,
Right.
they risk being slowly ground down by the Russian war machine.
Yeah.
He also suggests that the lack of a clear strategy could lead to a loss of support from Western allies, who may become disillusioned with the seemingly endless conflict.
So it's not just a military issue, it's also a political issue.
It's both.
If Ukraine can't convince its allies that it has a viable plan for winning the war,
Right.
they risk losing the support they need to survive.
Exactly.
And that's why Cooper's analysis is so important.
It is.
It's a wake-up call,
Yes.
a challenge for Ukraine to step up its game
Yeah.
and develop a strategy that can win the war, not just prolong it.
Yep. To win the war, not just prolong it.
Okay, so we've got a lot to think about here.
We do.
Russia's evolving tactics, Ukraine's strategic challenges,
Right.
the role of Western allies.
Right.
But before we get too lost in the big picture,
Right.
let's bring it back to the human level for a moment.
Okay.
What does all of this mean for the people on the ground, both in Ukraine and in Russia?
That's a crucial question, and it's one that Cooper addresses directly in his analysis.
Okay.
He argues that the longer this war drags on, the more suffering it will cause
Of course.
for everyone involved.
Yeah.
He paints a grim picture of a future where Ukraine is slowly bled dry by the conflict, its economy in ruins,
Right.
and its people exhausted and demoralized.
It's a sobering thought,
It is.
and it makes you wonder if there's any way out of this quagmire.
Yeah.
But before we get too pessimistic, let's explore some of the potential paths forward.
Okay.
What does Cooper suggest Ukraine can do to break this stalemate
Right.
and move towards a more favorable outcome?
Well, that's where his analysis gets really interesting and perhaps a bit controversial.
Okay.
He suggests that Ukraine needs to consider a more audacious and unconventional approach,
Okay.
one that goes beyond the traditional military strategies
Okay.
that have dominated the conflict so far.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What kind of unconventional approach is he talking about?
He doesn't get into specifics,
Okay.
but he hints at the need for a strategy that leverages Ukraine's strengths,
Okay.
exploits Russia's weaknesses,
Right.
and takes advantage of the unique circumstances of this conflict.
So thinking outside the box,
Yeah.
finding creative solutions,
Yeah.
maybe even taking some risks. But what does that actually look like in practice?
That's a great question.
I guess we'll have to delve deeper into Cooper's analysis to find out.
And that's where we'll pick up in our next segment.
Okay.
Where we'll explore some of Cooper's more provocative ideas
Right.
and discuss their potential implications for the future of this conflict.
Sounds like a plan. We'll be right back.
Okay, so we're back and ready to wrap up our look at the Russia-Ukraine conflict.
Yeah.
We've covered a lot.
We have.
This possible assassination in Moscow,
Right.
Russia's changing tactics on the battlefield in Ukraine, and some concerns about Ukraine's response.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that Cooper has some pretty unconventional ideas about how Ukraine can, like, turn the tide
Yes.
in this conflict.
Cooper's analysis takes a turn toward the provocative in this last section.
Okay.
He argues that Ukraine needs to shift its thinking and adopt a more asymmetric approach. Asymmetric approach.
Yeah.
That sounds like something out of a military textbook.
Yeah, think of it like David and Goliath.
Okay.
David couldn't defeat Goliath in a straight-up fight,
Right.
so he had to use his agility, his cunning, and his knowledge of the terrain to his advantage.
Right.
That's the essence of asymmetric warfare.
Okay.
It's about using unconventional tactics to level the playing field against a more powerful opponent.
Okay, that makes sense. But what would that look like in practice?
Right.
I mean, we've talked about like disrupting supply lines,
Yeah.
targeting infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
Is there more to it than that?
Cooper suggests that Ukraine needs to be more willing to take risks,
Okay.
to launch bold and unexpected attacks that keep Russia off balance.
Okay.
He argues that they need to be more proactive, dictating the terms of the conflict,
Some more offensive operations.
instead of just reacting to Russia's moves.
Okay. More surprise attacks, more taking the fight to the enemy.
Exactly.
That isn't that dangerous.
There's definitely a risk involved,
Yeah, I mean, Russia still has a significant military advantage.
and Cooper acknowledges that.
Wouldn't that risk heavy losses for Ukraine?
But he argues that the greater risk is sticking to the same old strategies
Right.
that haven't been working.
Right.
He believes that Ukraine needs to shake things up to force Russia to adapt to their tactics
Okay.
instead of the other way around.
So he's saying don't just play defense, go on offense, even if it seems risky.
Yeah, don't just play defense.
But what specific actions does he recommend?
Well, one of his more controversial suggestions
Okay.
is that Ukraine should consider launching limited cross-border raids into Russian territory.
Wait, actually attacking targets inside Russia?
Yeah,
That seems incredibly risky.
it's definitely risky.
Wouldn't that just escalate the conflict and provoke a massive retaliation from Russia?
That's a legitimate concern.
Yeah.
But Cooper argues that these raids wouldn't be about conquering territory
Okay.
or inflicting massive damage.
Right.
Instead, they would be about disrupting Russia's war effort, targeting key infrastructure and military assets
So more like strategic sabotage
that support their operations in Ukraine.
than a full-scale invasion.
Exactly.
But wouldn't that play right into Russia's propaganda narrative?
Potentially.
They'd portray it as an act of aggression and use it to justify further attacks on Ukraine?
That's a risk.
Yeah.
But Cooper believes that the potential benefits outweigh the risks.
Okay.
He argues that these cross-border raids would send a powerful message to both Russia and the West.
Okay.
That Ukraine is not just willing to defend its own territory,
Right.
but is also capable of striking back at the heart of the Russian war machine.
It's a bold strategy, to say the least, but is it realistic?
Yeah.
Does Ukraine even have the capabilities to pull off something like that?
That's a question that Cooper doesn't fully answer.
Okay.
He acknowledges that Ukraine would need to carefully consider the risks and potential consequences
Right.
before undertaking such operations.
Yeah.
But he believes that they have the potential to significantly disrupt Russia's war effort and force them to reconsider their strategy.
So we've got these cross-border raids,
Right.
more proactive offensives,
Yeah,
and a general emphasis on unconventional tactics.
right.
Anything else in Cooper's playbook that might surprise us?
Well, he also emphasizes the importance of information warfare.
Okay.
He argues that Ukraine needs to be more aggressive in countering Russian propaganda and disinformation,
Okay.
both domestically and internationally.
So not just winning the battles on the ground, but also winning the battle for hearts and minds.
Exactly.
But how can they do that effectively when Russia has such a well-oiled propaganda machine?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
Cooper suggests that Ukraine needs to be more creative and sophisticated in its messaging,
Okay.
using a combination of traditional media, social media, and even cultural diplomacy to get its story out to the world.
So it's about more than just broadcasting like facts and figures.
Right.
It's about telling a compelling story that resonates with people
Exactly.
on like an emotional level.
On an emotional level, yeah.
But getting back to Cooper's overall analysis,
Here.
is he optimistic about Ukraine's chances of winning this war?
Yeah, he's actually surprisingly optimistic.
Okay.
He believes that Ukraine has the potential to not just survive this conflict,
Okay.
but to emerge from it stronger and more united.
Okay.
But he emphasizes that it won't be easy,
Right.
and it will require a fundamental shift in their thinking and approach to the war.
So it's a call to action.
It is.
A challenge for Ukraine to break free from the constraints of conventional thinking
Right,
and embrace a more innovative and audacious strategy.
exactly. And he ends his analysis with a powerful message of hope and resilience.
Okay.
He reminds us that throughout history, underdogs have triumphed against seemingly insurmountable odds.
Right.
And he believes that Ukraine has the potential to do the same.
Wow. That's a thought-provoking note to end on.
Yeah,
We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
we have.
And it's clear that the situation in Ukraine is incredibly complex
Yeah.
and constantly evolving. There are no easy answers, and the path ahead is fraught with challenges and uncertainties.
It is.
But as Cooper's analysis reminds us,
Yeah,
even in the darkest of times, there is always hope.
there it is.
And there is always the potential for human resilience and ingenuity to prevail.
Absolutely.
Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive
It's been a pleasure.
into the Russia-Ukraine conflict.
Yeah.
And we'll be back soon with another look at events happening around the world.
Okay, so.
And until then, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep the conversation going.